There are 100 different ways a baby can die in the NICU. A collapsing ceiling is not supposed to be one of them. Most of them are quiet, insidious things. An infection that slips past a still-learning immune system. Lungs that, despite the hissing ventilator, simply forget their one essential job. A heart that beats like a frantic hummingbird until it just stops. My job is to stand as a sentry against the quiet things. I am a translator of beeps and a reader of blips, a warrior armed with hand sanitizer and a deep, abiding suspicion of germs. Tonight was a Tuesday, which in the neonatal intensive care unit of Chicago Metro Hospital meant it was just like every other night. The air hummed with the gentle chorus of technology keeping impossibly small humans alive. It smelled of antiseptic solution and stale coffee, the official perfume of the third shift. I was doing my rounds, my sneakers squeaking a familiar rhythm on the linoleum floor. "Hey there, fighter," I murmured to the tiny girl in Isolette 3, whose chart identified her as Baby Girl Harris. She weighed less than a bag of sugar but had the fierce, furrowed brow of a disgruntled CEO. I adjusted her feeding tube, my movements slow and practiced. Giving the nurses a hard time again, I see. Good for you. My internal monologue is my survival mechanism. Outwardly, I'm Nurse Rodriguez, calm, competent, professional. Inwardly, I'm running a sarcastic, 24/7 commentary on everything from Dr. Point Evans's questionable taste in ties to the hospital administration's brilliant idea to save money by buying the scratchiest paper towels known to man. It keeps me sane. I moved on down the line, my gaze sweeping across the glowing monitors. All green, all stable. My shoulders relaxed a fraction. It was a good night. A quiet night. Then I got to Isolette 7. Baby boy Doe. No last name, no frantic parents wearing a groove in the hallway carpet. He'd been a foundling, left at a fire station, born at least 10 weeks too early. He was the smallest of the small, a little bird with translucent skin and a will of iron. He'd fought off necrotizing enterocolitis, survived a pulmonary hemorrhage, and was slowly, miraculously, gaining weight. He was my guy. Everyone had one, the patient who crawled a little deeper into your heart. He was mine. "Still with us, little man?" I whispered, checking the seal on his ventilator tube. "Knew you would be. You're too stubborn to go anywhere." That's when I heard it again. A faint, groaning creak from the ceiling above his station. It had been happening for a week. The first time, I'd filed a maintenance report. The response, logged in the system 24 hours later, was a masterclass in institutional apathy. Building settling, monitored, no action required. No action required. I looked up at the acoustic tile, seeing the faint spiderweb of a crack I was sure hadn't been there yesterday. Buildings settle. I knew that. But there's a difference between settling and surrendering. This sounded like a surrender. "You hear that, little man?" I murmured, my hand resting gently on the hard plastic of his Isolette. "That's the sound of deferred maintenance. The ghost of budget cuts past." I made a mental note to file another report in the morning. A more insistent one. I straightened up, did one last check of his vitals on the monitor, and turned to head back to the nurse's station. The quiet hum of the unit was a comforting blanket. A good night. A stable night. The kind of boring, uneventful shift you prayed for? The universe, apparently, has a twisted sense of humor. The initial sound wasn't a groan this time. It was a sharp, percussive crack, like a giant snapping a bone. It was loud, violent, and utterly wrong. Every head in the unit snapped up. My colleague, Jenna, froze mid-chart, her pen hovering over the paper. The air went still, the hum of the machines suddenly seeming frail and insignificant. For one crystalline second, there was silence, the intake of a collective breath. Then came the snow. Not cold, soft flakes, but a sudden, shocking flurry of white dust and gritty particles, raining down from the ceiling. A fine powder that coated everything, catching in the fluorescent lights like a macabre blizzard. My eyes shot to the spot I had just been looking at, above Isolette 7. The spiderweb crack was no longer a spiderweb. It was a jagged, gaping wound, and it was growing. Time warps in a crisis. It stretches and compresses, and you don't get to choose which. The 4 seconds that followed the crack felt like a lifetime and no time at all. My brain didn't process it in words, but in a series of disjointed, high-definition snapshots. Snapshot 1. The tile directly over baby boy Doe sagged, pregnant with a weight it could no longer hold. Snapshot 2. The faces of my colleagues, masks of disbelief turning to horror. Snapshot 3. The red light on the baby's heart monitor, which had just started to flash. The stress, the noise, the sudden jolt, it was too much for his fragile system. Training and instinct are a potent combination. There was no thought, only a primal, chemical imperative. Move. "Jenna, code blue!" I screamed, my voice ripping through the stunned silence. My feet were already moving, closing the 10 feet to the isolette. My first instinct was to push. I slammed my hands against the heavy plastic box, trying to shove it clear. The wheels caught on a floor mat, a stupid non-slip mat that was about to get us both killed. It wouldn't budge more than a few inches. Above me, the groaning sound intensified into a screech of tortured metal. I risked a glance up. It wasn't just a tile anymore. A whole section of the ceiling drywall, metal struts, electrical conduits, all of it was breaking free. It was a slab of hospital, and it was coming down. There was no time to try the wheels again. There was no time for anything. My second instinct was more primitive. It was the instinct of a mother shielding her child, an animal protecting its young. There was no logic to it. 140 pounds of nurse is no match for half a ton of falling debris. But in that stretched, warped second, my body didn't care about physics. I did the only thing I could. I lunged forward, planting my feet and threw my body over the top of the isolette. I curled myself over the clear plastic dome, trying to make my back as broad a shield as possible. My head tucked down, arms wrapped tight around the sides. My cheek pressed against the cool, smooth surface. Through the plastic, I could see his tiny, perfect face, oblivious, his chest barely rising and falling. Protect the baby. The thought wasn't even a thought. It was a command that came from the deepest part of my soul. Then the world ended. It started with a shower of plaster and dust that filled my mouth and nose with a chalky, choking taste. Then came the impact. It wasn't a single blow, but a brutal, percussive series of them. A heavy, crushing weight slammed into my shoulder blades, driving the air from my lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. Something sharp and metallic sliced through the fabric of my scrubs and into the flesh of my upper arm, a hot, searing line of pain. Another blow hit my lower back, a blunt, thudding force that made my teeth rattle and sent a jolt of agony down my spine. The noise was deafening, a cataclysmic roar of tearing metal, splintering wood, and shattering plaster. The isolette beneath me shuddered violently, its own alarms now shrieking in protest. My world narrowed to the bubble of plastic beneath me. I held on, my knuckles white, my muscles screaming, convinced that at any moment the dome would shatter and we would both be crushed. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the final, killing blow. And then, silence. A ringing, profound silence, punctuated only by the frantic, high-pitched beeping of a dozen disconnected monitors and the distant sound of someone screaming. The crushing weight on my back remained, pinning me in place. The air was a thick, unbreathable soup of dust. I coughed, a dry, ragged sound that sent a fresh wave of fire across my back. Slowly, carefully, I opened my eyes. Through the dust-caked plastic, Baby Boy Doe was still there. A fine layer of white powder covered his tiny blanket, but he was untouched. His monitor was still flashing red, but the numbers were still there. He was alive. I was alive. A wave of relief so profound it felt like nausea washed over me. Then the pain, which had been a distant, abstract concept, came roaring into focus. My back was a solid sheet of fire. My arm throbbed with a deep, wet heat, but none of it mattered. "He's okay," I croaked to no one, my voice a dusty whisper. "The baby's okay." The aftermath was a blur of organized panic. Shouts, running feet, the frantic energy of a crisis unfolding. I felt hands on me, pulling away chunks of drywall. "Maya! Oh my God, Maya! Are you okay?" It was Jenna, her voice tight with fear. "The baby," I grunted, the words tasting like chalk. "Check the baby." The weight on my back lessened. I was able to push myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. A team of nurses and a resident who had sprinted from the ER were already swarming the isolette, carefully unplugging it and maneuvering it out of the wreckage. I watched them go, a fierce, protective satisfaction cutting through the pain. "Maya, you're bleeding," someone said. I looked down at my arm. The gash was deep, a dark red canyon welling with blood that soaked the sleeve of my scrubs. My back felt like one massive, throbbing bruise. "I'm fine," I insisted, waving away a paramedic who was trying to shine a light in my eyes. Get him stable first. That's when I saw him. He wasn't wearing scrubs or a white coat. He wore a crisp, dark suit that seemed utterly alien in the dusty chaos of the ruined NICU wing. He had a tight, bloodless face and the kind of eyes that didn't see people, only potential legal liabilities. This was Mr. Davies, the hospital's head of risk management. His title was a euphemism. His real job was head of making problems disappear. He surveyed the scene, his expression a carefully neutral mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze swept past the gaping hole in the ceiling, past the terrified nurses, and landed on me. "Nurse Rodriguez," he said, his voice as sterile as the floor should have been. "I need a preliminary statement." "A what?" I asked, bewildered. A paramedic was now trying to wrap my arm. "Your account of the incident," Davies clarified, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. "For the record," I stared at him. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Thank God you saved that child." Just a cold, immediate demand for a statement. "The ceiling collapsed," I said, my voice flat, on top of my patient's isolette. "And you intervened?" he stated, not asked. "Did you follow the hospital's emergency evacuation protocol?" I blinked, the absurdity of the question momentarily stunning me silent. "Protocol?" The ceiling came down in 4 seconds. There was no time for protocol. There was time to act, so I acted. "So you moved the isolette from its designated station before the main collapse?" he pressed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's a breach of equipment handling guidelines." I actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief that sent a fresh spasm of pain through my back. "Are you serious?" It was either breach guidelines or let a baby be crushed to death. I made a command decision. His face remained impassive. "All unrostered equipment movement must be logged. We'll have to review the chain of events." He clicked off his recorder. "Thank you, nurse. We'll speak again later." He turned and walked away, already speaking quietly and urgently into his phone. The paramedic finished wrapping my arm and started checking my back, hissing under his breath at the state of the bruising. A few minutes later, 2 city police officers arrived. They were polite enough, but their presence felt heavy, official. They asked me to walk them through it, step by step. I did, my voice growing hoarse. One of the officers, a younger guy with a notebook, paused. "So, you physically put your hands on the isolette and moved it? Was that before or after you noticed the structural failure?" "It was during," I said, exasperated. "It was all one event. The ceiling cracked, I shoved the isolette, it got stuck, I covered it." He scribbled something down. "And in your professional opinion, did moving the equipment contribute in any way to the instability of the overhead structure?" The question hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was asking, in the most roundabout way possible, if I had somehow caused it, if my desperate attempt to save a life was actually the reason the disaster happened. The rage started then, a low, hot ember in my chest. It was a feeling I would come to know very, very well over the next 48 hours. "No," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "In my professional opinion, the ceiling collapsed because it was faulty. I stopped it from killing a child. That's my statement. Are we done?" The next 24 hours were a surreal nightmare of urgent care visits, painkillers that didn't quite work, and a series of increasingly bizarre phone calls from hospital administration. I was placed on mandatory medical leave, which sounded supportive but felt deeply punitive. Jenna called once, her voice a hushed whisper, to tell me that baby boy Doe was stable and had been transferred to a partner hospital downtown. She also told me that a memo had gone out forbidding staff from discussing the structural incident with anyone. A gag order. I was a hero for a few hours, and now I was a liability. The call came the next afternoon. It was Mr. Davies' assistant, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. There were some follow-up questions, and it would be best to meet in person. A car was already on its way for me. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. The car was a black town car, the kind that silently announces that someone has more money than you ever will. It dropped me at the hospital's administrative building, a sleek glass and steel tower far removed from the messy, human reality of the main hospital. I was escorted to a conference room on the top floor. It had a view of the entire city, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen, and a palpable sense of menace. Mr. Davies was there, of course, looking as smug as ever. But he wasn't the one in charge. The gravity in the room was centered on the man standing by the window, his back to me. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my car. When he turned around, I felt a jolt of recognition. I'd seen his face on the cover of business magazines in the grocery store checkout line. Alistair Vance, the reclusive, borderline mythical CEO of Sentinel Dynamics, a global tech conglomerate. A man famous for his brutal business tactics and for being pathologically private. He was the father of baby boy Doe. His face was even sharper and more severe in person. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue, and they held an expression of such profound glacial coldness that I felt the air in the room chill. He looked at me not as a person, but as a problem to be analyzed and solved. Or, more likely, eliminated. Flanking him were two other people, a man and a woman in identical dark suits. They had the blank, watchful expressions of high-priced lawyers, which I quickly learned was exactly what they were. "Miss Rodriguez," Vance said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room, a low thrum of absolute authority. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He didn't thank me. He didn't ask how I was. He looked at Davies. "Is this her?" Davies nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mr. Vance. This is Nurse Maya Rodriguez." Vance's gaze returned to me. It was like being pinned by an insect collector. "You were the nurse on duty for my son." It was a statement of fact, but it carried the weight of an accusation. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "I was." He took a step closer. "Tell me what happened." I recounted the story again, the same one I'd told the police, the paramedics, and Davies. I kept my tone clinical and professional, describing the sounds, the dust, the sequence of events. I explained my decision-making process, the split-second choice I had to make. Throughout my explanation, he remained utterly still, his expression unreadable. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. "So, you were aware of a potential structural issue prior to the event?" the female lawyer asked, her voice sharp. "I was aware of a creaking sound," I corrected. "I filed a maintenance report. It was dismissed." "And you took it upon yourself to physically move a highly sensitive piece of medical equipment against protocol based on a creaking sound?" the male lawyer chimed in. The ember of rage in my chest flared. "No, I moved it based on the ceiling actively collapsing." "Are you not understanding the sequence of events here?" Alistair Vance held up a hand, and his lawyers instantly fell silent. He never took his eyes off me. "My son is now in another hospital," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "He had to be transported, subjected to additional risks, because this facility was not secure. He is alive, but his recovery may have been complicated by the trauma of the event." The insinuation was vile, a twisting knife. He was trying to pin the consequences of the hospital's negligence on my actions. The female lawyer slid a thin, leather-bound folder across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of me. "Mr. Vance is of course grateful that his son was not more seriously injured," she said, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "However, this is now a complex legal matter. We need to ensure a clear and accurate narrative going forward. This is a standard non-disclosure agreement." I opened the folder. It was dense with legalese, but the message was unmistakable. I was to never speak of what happened to anyone. Not the press, not my friends, not my family. In exchange for my eternal silence, a single line item at the bottom of page 3 offered a one-time payment in consideration of services rendered. The amount was $10,000. I looked at the number. It was an insult wrapped in an invoice. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a reward. It was a price tag. The price for my silence. The price for my integrity. They weren't seeing a nurse who had saved a child's life. They were seeing a blue-collar worker who had stumbled into a rich man's problem, and they were trying to buy her off like one would a troublesome contractor. I closed the folder and slowly pushed it back across the table. I finally met Alistair Vance's icy gaze, and for the first time, I let him see the fire behind my eyes. "My services aren't for sale," I said, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed fury. "Your son is alive because I did my job. I suggest you direct your legal team to the people who failed to do theirs." I stood up, my bruised back screaming in protest. "If that's all, I'll be leaving now." Vance's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? It was impossible to tell. He simply watched me as I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the folder, the lawyers, and the suffocating weight of his power behind me. The rage was no longer an ember. It was a bonfire. The walk out of the administrative building was a daze. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my ribcage. I had just stared down a billionaire, a man who could probably buy the entire hospital and turn it into condos if he felt like it. The adrenaline from the confrontation carried me all the way home, but as soon as I shut the door to my small apartment, it evaporated, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. I had made a powerful enemy. The official notification came less than an hour later. It was an email from HR, CCing Mr. Davies. The subject line was stark. Official notice of suspension. The body of the email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It cited the ongoing investigation into the unfortunate structural incident and my reported deviations from established emergency and equipment handling protocols. It said that, in the interest of a thorough and impartial review, I was being placed on indefinite, unpaid suspension, effective immediately. Unpaid. The word leaped off the screen. The final paragraph was the real killer. I was forbidden from setting foot on hospital property, and I was explicitly ordered not to communicate with any current Chicago Metro Hospital employees regarding the incident or the investigation. They were isolating me, building a wall around me so they could control the narrative. I immediately grabbed my phone and called Jenna. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I just got an email. They suspended me. Can you believe this? Call me back." I tried my friend Sarah, who worked in pediatrics on the floor below. Voicemail. I sent a frantic text to our group chat with a few other nurses. They suspended me. Unpaid. Can you guys believe this? The response was a chilling silence. The three little dots indicating someone was typing would appear, then vanish, then appear again, then vanish. No one was writing back. The gag order had been effective. They were scared. Scared of losing their jobs, scared of Davies, scared of the ghost of Alistair Vance that now haunted the hospital's hallways. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. It was my official suspension notice, this time on paper, as if to make it more real, more permanent. Later that day, a low-level security guard I vaguely recognized came to my apartment to collect my hospital ID and parking pass. He was apologetic, unable to meet my eyes. "Sorry about this, Maya," he mumbled, taking the plastic card from my hand. "It's just orders." "I know," I said, the fight draining out of me. "It's not your fault." Watching him walk away with my ID felt like a physical blow. That card wasn't just a piece of plastic, it was a symbol of everything I had worked for. It was my identity, Nurse Rodriguez. The person who knew how to calm a frantic parent, how to insert an IV into a vein as thin as a thread, how to stand as a sentry against the quiet things. And now, I was just Maya, unemployed, injured, accused. The days that followed were a blur of pain and frustration. My back was a constant, aching reminder of my supposed crime. I couldn't sleep properly. I replayed the ceiling collapse over and over in my mind, searching for a single thing I could have done differently, a single way I could have followed the mythical protocol that Davies was so obsessed with. There was none. It was a lie. A convenient fiction they were building to protect themselves from the wrath of Alistair Vance. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. The silence was the worst part. The silence from my phone, from my friends, from the life I had built. I was a ghost in my own career. I would scroll through nursing forums and job boards online, a knot of panic tightening in my stomach. A suspension for protocol violations, especially in a high-profile incident like this, was a black mark, a career killer. Who would ever hire me? I was alone. The institution I had dedicated my life to had not only abandoned me, it was actively trying to destroy me. They had taken my heroism and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. The bonfire of my rage had cooled into a hard, dense ball of bitterness in my gut. They thought they could break me. They thought they could just erase me, and I would go away quietly. A week after the suspension, I hit the bottom. The pain in my back had settled into a dull, grinding ache that painkillers only slightly blunted. My savings account, never particularly robust on a nurse's salary in Chicago, was already looking sickly. I spent my days pacing the 3 rooms of my apartment, a restless energy building with nowhere to go. I felt powerless, a tiny cog caught in a massive, indifferent machine. One afternoon, I was staring out the window, watching people walk to work, live their lives, when the buzzer rang. It was a courier with a stiff, expensive-looking envelope. It bore the logo of a prestigious downtown law firm, Vance's Law Firm. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet. It was worse. It was an official, legally binding version of the offer they had made in the conference room, only this time it was stripped of any pretense of gratitude. The letter was a symphony of passive-aggressive legal threats. It referenced the unfortunate incident and my unauthorized actions. It spoke of the significant emotional distress and potential developmental setbacks experienced by Mr. Vance's son. It painted me as a rogue employee whose recklessness had endangered a patient and who was now being investigated for gross negligence. Then came the offer. They called it a humanitarian grant. A single payment of $5,000, half of what they'd offered before. It was contingent on my signing a revised, even more ironclad NDA, and an additional document that amounted to a full confession and admission that I had acted outside of established protocols. They wanted me to sign a piece of paper that validated their entire false narrative. They wanted me to agree that I was the villain of the story. The check was clipped to the top of the document. $5,000. It was an amount calibrated to be insulting, yet just tempting enough for someone in my desperate situation. It was enough to cover a couple of months' rent, to ease the immediate panic. It was a test. A final, cynical push to see if my integrity had a price. I stared at that check. $5,000 to sell my own soul, to agree that saving a child's life was a mistake, to let Davies and Vance and the whole rotten system win. And in that moment, staring at the crisp corporate check, something inside me didn't just break, it ignited. The bitterness, the despair, the feeling of helpless frustration, it all burned away, leaving behind something clean and hard and sharp, rage. Pure, incandescent, righteous rage. My movements were sharp, precise. I walked to my kitchen counter, I picked up the check, and with a satisfying shrip, I tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters, and the quarters into tiny, fluttering pieces that I let fall into the trash can like confetti at a funeral. I was done being a victim. I was done being scared. I was not going to be erased. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I searched for the website of the Illinois Nurses Association. I found their legal aid department's phone number. I picked up my phone, my heart now beating with a new rhythm, not of fear, but of war. I took a deep breath and dialed. "Hello," I said, when a woman with a kind voice answered. "My name is Maya Rodriguez. I'm a registered nurse, and I was just suspended for saving a patient's life. I think I need a lawyer." The spark had been lit. The siege was over. It was time to fight back. My new lawyer was a woman named Helen Pierce. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, a no-nonsense haircut, and a palpable disdain for hospital administrators. She was exactly who I needed. After I told her the whole story, from the creaking ceiling to the confetti of the ripped-up check, she didn't make any promises. She just nodded slowly and said, "They picked a fight with the wrong nurse." The hospital's internal investigation was, as Helen predicted, a complete sham. It was a carefully constructed document designed to arrive at a predetermined conclusion, that I was a reckless employee whose actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, constituted gross negligence. They had statements from maintenance logs, claiming the ceiling had been inspected, a doctored version of the emergency protocols, and a conspicuous lack of testimony from any of the other nurses who were actually there. It was a neat little package of lies, designed to be handed to Alistair Vance's legal team. "They're building a firewall," Helen explained, tapping the report on her desk. "They're offering you up as the sacrificial lamb to appease the angry billionaire, so he sues you, a nurse with no assets instead of them, a hospital with a massive insurance policy." It was infuriating, but we had no way to prove it. It was my word against the entire institution. We needed a miracle. And a week later, we got one. It arrived in Helen's inbox as an email from an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was simple: NICU Isolette 7. The body of the email contained only a single link to a downloadable video file and a short message. "They don't know this camera exists. Show them the truth." Helen called me immediately. "Maya, you need to see this." She played the file over a video call. The image that appeared on my screen was a crisp, high-definition, top-down view of Isolette 7 and the area around it. It wasn't a security camera feed. The quality was too good. It was from one of the hospital's new infant monitoring systems, a camera placed directly over the isolette to allow parents and doctors to remotely check on the baby. Because baby boy Doe was a foundling, no one had ever bothered to activate the remote access. The camera had been silently recording, its data stored on a separate, local server that Davies and his cronies had completely overlooked. The video was brutal and undeniable. It was the unimpeachable witness. It showed me doing my rounds, It showed me looking up at the ceiling. Then, it showed the first shower of dust. The video had a timestamp down to the millisecond. From the first visible sign of collapse to the moment the main debris fell was exactly 3.8 seconds. The footage was chillingly clear. It showed me sprinting to the isolette, shoving it, and the wheels catching on the mat. It showed me not hesitating for an instant as I threw my body over the plastic dome. Then it showed the ceiling giving way in a horrifying cascade. The camera shook violently, the image blurring for a second, but it captured the entire slab of drywall and metal slamming onto my back. It captured the way my body absorbed the impact, the way I stayed put, shielding the child beneath me. It was irrefutable. It wasn't negligence. It was heroism, captured in high definition. The person who sent this also sent it to one other address, Helen said, her voice grim but triumphant. The personal office of Alistair Vance. I expected a call from Helen, or maybe a smarmy, backtracking email from Mr. Davies. I did not expect a knock on my apartment door 2 nights later. I opened it to find Alistair Vance standing in the hallway. He was alone. No lawyers, no entourage, no 5-0 suit. He was wearing a simple dark sweater and slacks. He looked diminished. The aura of untouchable power was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness. The glacial coldness in his eyes had melted, leaving behind something raw and painfully human. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. May I come in for a moment?" I was so shocked I could only nod. He stepped inside and I closed the door. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my small living room, looking out of place, a king in a commoner's cottage. "I saw the video," he said without preamble. He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead staring at a framed photo on my bookshelf. "I watched it 27 times. He finally turned to face me, and the shame on his face was real and devastating. I don't know how to apologize for my actions," he said, his voice raspy. "There is no excuse, but I want to try and offer you a reason." He took a shaky breath. "My wife, she died giving birth to our son. An embolism. 1 minute she was fine, the next she was gone. For the last 3 months, that little boy in that plastic box has been the only thing I have left of her. The only thing I have left, period." He sank onto my couch as if his legs could no longer support him. "My entire life, people have either wanted something from me or tried to take something from me. When the ceiling collapsed, when my son was put at risk, my mind went to the only place it knows how to go. Defense, threat assessment, control. I didn't see a person who had saved my son. I saw a variable in a lawsuit, a complication. I was wrong, so profoundly, fundamentally wrong." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were glistening. "You were willing to die for a stranger's child, for my son, and in return, I treated you like a criminal. I tried to silence you. I tried to ruin you. The word sorry isn't big enough for what I did." He pulled out his phone and swiped the screen. He turned it to show me. It was a photo of baby boy Doe, or rather, baby boy Vance, I presumed. He was home, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, his eyes open and alert. He was beautiful and perfect. "His name is Arthur," Alistair Vance whispered. "After my wife's father. He's alive and healthy and home with me because of you." He put the phone away, his hands trembling slightly. "I can't undo what I did. I can't take back the threats or the suspension or the fear I'm sure you've felt. But I am asking you now, what do I need to do to make this right?" I stood there, looking at this broken, powerful man. The rage I had held onto for weeks, the righteous anger that had fueled me, began to dissipate. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something else. Understanding. "You can start," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "by helping me make sure this never happens to another nurse again." Oh, the aftermath was swift and decisive. With Alistair Vance's formidable resources now aimed at the hospital instead of me, the institution folded like a house of cards. The video was the weapon, and Vance was the one wielding it. Mr. Davies was fired. The sham investigation was thrown out. The entire hospital board was forced to resign, pending a state-led inquiry into criminal negligence, which uncovered years of falsified maintenance logs and diverted funds. My suspension was expunged from my record, and I received a formal, groveling letter of apology from the new interim CEO, along with an offer of full back pay and my job. I politely declined. My time at Chicago Metro was over. The hospital settled for an astronomical sum. But as I had told Vance, I didn't want their money. 2 months later, I stood at a podium in a downtown hotel ballroom, blinking in the flash of news cameras. The backdrop behind me bore a simple, elegant logo and words I still couldn't quite believe were real. The Rodriguez Initiative. Alistair Vance had been true to his word. He had taken my anger and his guilt and forged them into something powerful. He had provided the initial endowment, a staggering $50 million, to create a new foundation. Its mission was simple and fierce: to advocate for patient and nurse safety, to provide pro bono legal services for healthcare workers who face retaliation for reporting negligence, and to lobby for stronger oversight of hospital maintenance and administration. I was its first executive director. For too long, the people on the front lines of our healthcare system have been asked to do the impossible with dwindling resources, I said into the microphones, my voice clear and steady. They are silenced, they are punished for speaking up, and their warnings are ignored until tragedy strikes. This initiative will be their voice. It will be their shield. My gaze scanned the crowd of reporters and healthcare advocates. In the back of the room, standing quietly against the wall, was Alistair Vance. He wasn't there for the cameras. He held a small, framed photo in his hands, the picture of his son, Arthur. He caught my eye and gave a slow, solemn nod. It was a nod of gratitude, of partnership, of a debt being paid. I had walked into that NICU, a nurse, a sentry against the quiet things. I had walked out a pariah. But now, I stood here as something new. My job was no longer just to protect one patient at a time, but to protect the protectors. The work would be hard, but for the first time since the dust had settled, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be.